We want to do so by presenting to you a tool that we've recently developed, and we think it nicely illustrates the potential, but also the challenges of social listening for public health. Our tool is called PubliCo. We can go to the next slide. And we developed it in response to a call of the Swiss National Science Foundation that was issued early in the pandemic, soliciting innovative concepts to help manage this public health crisis. A number of other sponsors have embarked on the project. We are proud to say that we have also received support from the WHO to probe the international applicability of the concept. And as you'll see in a moment, PubliCo is a way of not only listening, next slide, please. Not only listening to people, but also to deliver information to them. And when I wrote the grant application and developed the project idea, I was fortunate to have the last slide. Thank you. I was fortunate to have a brilliant young scholar in our institute's team who had thought about similar issues for some time, prompted by other public health crises in the past. And this person is my co-presenter, Giovanni Spitale, who has for the past year been dedicating his research time to PubliCo as a way of responding to the pandemic and of fostering societal resilience to public health crisis more generally. And he will now introduce you to the new tool. Over to you, Giovanni.
So thanks. Hello, everyone, and thanks for having us in this discussion. I'm very excited to present some very preliminary results from what we're doing. Our focus for today is not to discuss about the results, but about the process in itself and about what we are learning during this process, because it's a very new field and there's a lot of work to do. And I prepared this minimal program for us for today. First, I will briefly discuss about the need. So what kind of needs in terms of social listening emerged because of the COVID situation, of the COVID crisis. I will speak about the strategy we tried to put together. We are still putting together it would be nice to have that's how we did it. Then I will discuss a bit of the results that we are having, and then we will open the discussion on the ethical issues that we're seeing in the process. So first of all, I'd like to start with a couple of quotes that we collected through the tool, and then at the end it will be clear to you how we collected these quotes. But I think this is a good starting point. These are quotes, stuff that people wrote to us. That's why the English is strange in places, from the tool. So we are collecting very short narratives in this context that range from I am more at home, I don't meet friends, I don't think it's necessarily positive, the pandemic situation, but I mean, it could be worse, to people telling us that they are sick of the whole situation, but in the sense that they would like the Swiss government in this case, to impose stricter measures so that they could go back to normal life in a faster way, hoping for a normal summer for 2021. All the way down to this, I'd like to read this. I lost my job, I lost my flat, and soon I'll be living from the welfare. Bersenko are, I quote, stupid fuckers, blind on both eyes. It took them way too long to focus on children, way too long. It looks as if they have no agenda at all. I start understanding people who believe in a corona conspiracy, make Berset leave, or I'm sure he will get killed. I am now in Italy at the moment. I came here to visit my family after a long time, and I am sure that in this country, for a sentence like this, you could have trouble with justice. So what is the need? What kind of listening do we have to perform? Well, first of all, we have to understand the views of these people, their ideas, their opinions, because if we want to develop fair and effective measures, there's no other way to do it than taking into account how these people experience the world in the context of this crisis. And I'd like to focus a bit on the difficult balance between effectiveness and fairness. We have mighty and powerful definitions of what effectiveness is. I mean, it's easy to measure if something is effective or not once you have parameters against which you want to measure that. But effectiveness can change a lot because maybe the best possible measure is not is not possible to apply in a given context because people don't want to comply to these measures. So maybe a suboptimal measure could lead to more effective results. And in the same way, we have very good definitions of fairness from social justice theories, from distributive justice as well. But in order to be fair, we need to know who's doing worse in this situation. And from this starting point, we started to look at how has been done risk and crisis communication up to yesterday. And mostly it's like this. There is an official body which prepares a package of information that is then given to the public about which we know little quite often. Opinion polls have a limit. They are one-off, they are not real-time. So when you make a choice based on these, you rely on an old picture of reality. They are resource-intensive. And yeah, so it's a difficult instrument to use. So we asked ourselves, what can we do in this context? Well, we can try to close the loop and to provide to the public a way to give back information to official bodies, to policymakers on how they are doing in order to better design and better deploy information and measures in the context of public health crisis. So this is our strategy in a nutshell. On the public side, we have a problem, which is receiving reliable and tailored information on the acute event. And on the policymaker side, we have a problem, which is sensing the public opinion to design and deploy response measures. So our citizen can go to this tool that we are now developing, and can take an online survey. And this data goes to our database, and based on a rule system, the citizen gets back some personalized information based on their individual context and situation. So depending whether or not you have children, in which part of the country you live, your knowledge about this or that phenomenon, you have personalized information. The same information which is fed into the database by the citizens to have these individual benefits, so personalized information on the crisis, can be used by policymakers to build complex queries and to explore either just to see a description of the database or to explore correlations between different scales for which we collect scores. And this becomes actionable information, and this can be done in real time. So that was the very first idea when we started to work on PubliCo, to do something which is able to collect and provide information from the public to the public, ready to use in real time for policymakers. And I will skip on this because you can see this online. It's just a short video of how the system works because it's already online. Just a tiny word on the tech stack for those of you who are interested into the details. It's built with React, Survey.js, TypeScript, Django, MariaDB. All of these, as you see, is open source. So all the code that we use for building PubliCo and all the code that we are writing while developing PubliCo is open. And the idea is to be able in a short while to offer these both as a product and as a service that everyone everywhere in the world can take and use for risk and crisis communication, because it's fully modular, because it's fully open, because it's customizable, flexible, and translatable. What are the key ethical features for this kind of tool? We asked ourselves when we want to develop something like this, what is important for us to keep in mind? Well, first of all, we want to be transparent, free, and open. That's fundamental, because every step of the process is completely accessible to everyone, not only to the academic or to the scholarly community, from the protocol to the data, including the intermediate data. And then based on this, we guarantee anonymity, meaning that people can go and see in the code how we guarantee anonymity, because we don't use cookies, we don't use behavioral tracking, we don't use any kind of personal or digital identifier. And we do listen. We actually listen to what people want to tell us. And we did this in every phase of the project from the very beginning, because when we started asking ourselves what kind of information do we want to provide people, we didn't just sit in a room and talk through the issue and decided, okay, we are going to provide information about vaccinations and side effects and so on. But we worked on Google Trends data to see what kind of things people were looking when looking for COVID. we did some computational linguistics on a corpus of major news and media publications to see what kind of information was available when making these queries. So what people look for, what they find, and then what is the gap in between. And then we took this information, we built a skeleton of a survey, so the topics that we wanted to ask for, and a skeleton of informational feedback, and we put it for validation through Citizen Science Center Zurich, so that we could have an opinion, a direct opinion from citizens about the structure of the tool. And we try to understand, not only to listen, so we include a qualitative component. It's in the scheme in the previous slide. I didn't discuss about that before, but now I will explain you. We have a survey component, but also a diary component. I like to say that I do a lot of mixed method research, and the idea is with the quantitative part, you can see the magnitude, the size of a phenomenon. With the qualitative part, you can see the meaning, you can dig deeper, you can develop new items and see unforeseen phenomena that you cannot plan for in a survey. We encourage people to speak their mind. We don't just measure what they think using existing scores. And finally, this is something which is still under development. We will soon let them generate their own hypotheses, because not only the tool is open, but also the data generated from the tool is open. So people will be able, like lay citizens, will be able to go to the tool and to see the data for a specific time frame or for a specific geographical area, and see the scores, explore correlations, and generate their own hypotheses that then will be also considered by the research team. And finally, we give something back. And this is, again, very important for us. We don't just collect information. We don't just listen. Yes, we listen, but we listen in order to do something, which is, on the one hand, providing information to the people, and on the other is providing information to policymakers to design better policies, to take into account what people think when developing these measures. And here I will briefly talk through the pilot results. My point here is not to make any conclusion on how Swiss people are experiencing COVID, but on the tool itself. So the point here is that we are able to approach, yeah, it's a digital tool, so it's easy to use for young people, but we also see that we have a 5.30% of people using the tool in the age group 66 to 75. So it works also, it can work also for people who are not exactly youngsters. We have a tool which is used more or less in the same way by male and females. And in terms of nationality and time spent in Switzerland, yes, we have a lot of Swiss citizens, but we have a
1 minute.
30%. Yes, thanks. Yeah, basically wrapping this up, we can approach different segments of the population, and this is clear in the demographics, but it's even more clear and more interesting when we look to the data from some scales. And here we are comparing the data from the cognitive understanding score and from the moral orientation score. On the x-axis, we have respondents, and on the y-axis, we have the score. In the first plot, you will see we have a quite normal distribution of the data, meaning that the understanding of the main symptoms is quite homogeneous in our sample. While in the moral orientation, in the reactance scale, so how fine people are with restrictions from the government, we have two clear clusters. So people who are fine with restrictions and people who are not fine at all. We can approach also people with critical opinions. And here I will hand over to Nikola for some conclusions on what we are learning.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think you've seen that we can think of PubliCo as a way of actually inviting people to share their opinions, even very critical ones, rather than just listening in on them without their knowledge or their consent. We're also trying to use this as a tool to deliver targeted information in a fairly non-paternalistic way. You've already heard from Giovanni about this, what we think are the strengths, the transparency, inclusivity in various stages of this project, anonymity that's guaranteed by transparency, clear data policies, and the way we collect the data, the combination of qualitative data and actually a citizen science, a joint approach of actually looking at these data. Next slide, please. We also see this as an opportunity not only to listen, but to provide information. And the next slide, please. We think still there are a number of challenges. And although we think we've already been able to highlight some elements of what might emerge as an ethical framework in which we might come to in the discussion, I think there's a number of challenges we really need to be aware of. And as we said, it's early days for us in this project. We think it's important, if we want to deliver targeted information, to also think about the issue of information bubbles. How can we avoid that certain people only get certain information, but may have wanted get access to a full set of information? How can we, what's the role, let's say, for censorship? If you think of the comment that you just heard, this one quote that was very offensive, is there any role for censorship from our side, as managers of PubliCo? What about when writing the information text, we had to kind of balance information versus nudging and implicit blaming and shaming, for instance, for people who hesitate to comply with restrictive measures. I think that'll be an interesting theme to take up in our discussion. How paternalistic do we think public health can and should be? A key issue is obviously public trust. And there we are just at the beginning, because we've just started to roll out this tool and see how the people will accept it. But I think trust is key in a crisis situation. This trust in government officials, in research tools, etc., might be shaken. We also think there might be a potential for abuse in non-democratic societies. It's one thing to apply this in Switzerland, but in other, maybe less stable contexts, it might be difficult for people to actually say what they think. It might also be dangerous if anonymity might not be guaranteed under these circumstances, or information about groups might be revealed, even if even if individual opinions are not tracked. And then, of course, if we get free access to data, it means data can be freely misinterpreted. So knowing who did the analysis will be an important issue if you want to pursue an open source approach. And then finally, we think that what seems simple, writing these information blurbs that people will get back, there's obviously a danger of bias in whoever writes this information. And so this is certainly something that needs a system of checks and balances to make sure this information is truly balanced. So much for our little presentation. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, as a last note, the tool, as I was saying, is online. So if you go to publico.community/survey/18, you will be able to pre-test and eventually to send us your opinions and feedback and considerations on the next version of the survey who's about to roll out. So if you want to play with the tool, go and have fun. At least I hope you will have fun. And you will find all the references like our works and the work which we based our work on in this presentation, which I think will be shared at the end of the conference. So thanks for your time, and looking forward for the conversation.
Thank you, Giovanni and Nikola. In the interest of time, I picked one question from the Q&A, but I would ask, there's actually quite a few for you, if you could also type your answers into the Q&A with the remaining questions. And regarding misinformation or disinformation or listening to closed groups. So, one of the challenges that public health teams have been grappling with is how to be best of service to people who have questions and concerns, but they may be exposed to harmful misinformation and disinformation in closed messaging groups or closed groups online. Do you have any advice for health teams on how to provide more broad support in this context with consideration of ethics of social listening? Have you thought of this? What would be your thinking here?
Well, our idea was not really to kind of find access to closed groups in a direct way of actually kind of interfering with them. But we think if there is an alternative offer such as PubliCo, where everyone, notwithstanding their opinion, can contribute, and if this is perceived as a broad participatory approach, this might be in direct competition to just, conversations in closed groups. And we hope this way to open up discourse so people don't have to resort to their own closed circles to ventilate their opinions and dwell on whatever their stance might be, but to open this up into a participatory discourse.
Exactly, and that's why for us transparency and openness and also the reputation of who is doing this kind of who is using this kind of tools in terms of institutions is important, and the involvement of citizens in every phase of the project.